7 years ago, my wife betrayed me with a married man. I thought I had buried those memories deep, moved on with my life, and closed the door on the past. But last night she called me. She was crying, terrified, begging for my help. What would you do if the person who shattered your heart suddenly pulled you into a dangerous mystery? This is a story of betrayal, secrets, and a truth so dark it will leave you questioning everything. Stay with me until the end. You won't believe where this leads. The rain hammered against the windows of my small, dimly lit office. I sat at my desk, flipping through a stack of unpaid bills, trying to ignore the bitter taste of cheap whiskey lingering in my mouth. My name is Jacob Harris, and I'm a private investigator in a city where secrets are currency and trust is a luxury no one can afford. 7 years had passed since my wife, Alice, betrayed me. I still remember the day I found out, like a knife twisting in my gut. She wasn't just my wife. She was my world, the person I thought I'd grow old with. But that world crumbled when I discovered her affair with Richard Lawson, a married businessman with a reputation as clean as a polished coin. After the divorce, I buried myself in work, chasing down cheating spouses and digging up dirt for clients who had more money than morals. It was ironic, really, exposing other people's betrayals while never fully recovering from my own. My life was a routine of shadows and lies, and I was fine with that, or so I thought. That night, as I sat in my office, I felt an odd sense of unease. Something was coming. I could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating like the calm before a storm. Little did I know, my past was about to claw its way back, and it wouldn't take no for an answer. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. The screen lit up with an unknown number, and for a moment, I hesitated. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. I let it ring twice, my hand hovering over the phone. On the third ring, I answered. "Hello." My voice was rough, tired. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of uneven breathing. Then, a voice, fragile, trembling, and unmistakable, said my name. "Jacob, it's me, Alice." My grip on the phone tightened as memories surged back. The late-night arguments, her tearful apologies, and the gut-wrenching betrayal. My first instinct was to hang up, to pretend I hadn't heard her voice. But something stopped me. There was fear in her tone, a raw desperation that sent a chill down my spine. "What do you want, Alice?" I said, my voice cold and distant. "I need your help," she whispered, her words barely audible over the sound of her muffled sobs. "Please, Jacob, I have nowhere else to go." I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Help? After everything you did? You have the nerve to ask me for help." "I know I don't deserve it," she said, her voice cracking. "But I'm in trouble. I don't know who else to call." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down, to tell her she was on her own. But another part, one I hated to admit still existed, felt a flicker of concern. Despite everything, I couldn't shake the image of the woman I had once loved, now broken and afraid. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. There was a long pause before she answered. "He's gone, Jacob. Richard's gone. And I think they're coming for me next." "Gone?" I frowned, leaning forward. "What the hell does that mean?" "I can't explain over the phone," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Please, can we meet? Just this once. I'll explain everything." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Where?" "There's a diner on Willow Street. Meet me there in an hour. Please, Jacob, I need you." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, to let her face her demons alone. But curiosity and something deeper, something I couldn't quite name, drove me to grab my coat and step into the night. The streets were slick with rain, and the cold wind bit at my skin as I walked to my car. I told myself this was just another case, another job. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This was the past clawing its way back into my life, and I was about to open a door I'd sworn I'd keep shut forever. As I drove through the rain-soaked streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading straight into the heart of a storm, one that could destroy everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild. The diner on Willow Street hadn't changed much in 7 years. Its flickering neon sign still read Eddie's Diner, and the scent of burnt coffee and greasy food greeted me as I pushed open the door. The place was nearly empty, save for a trucker hunched over a plate of eggs and a waitress who didn't bother to look up from her phone. And then I saw her. Alice sat in the far corner, her back to the wall, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. She looked nothing like the confident, poised woman I once knew. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She clutched a cup of coffee with trembling hands, her nails bitten to the quick. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure if I should turn around and leave or confront her. But then her eyes met mine, and something unspoken passed between us. A shared history too tangled to unravel in a single glance. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence between us was thick, filled with words we weren't ready to say. "You look terrible," I said finally, breaking the tension. Alice gave a bitter laugh, but it quickly turned into a choked sob. "You have no idea." I folded my arms, leaning back in the booth. "Start talking. Why are you here? And what's this about Richard being gone?" She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "Richard disappeared 3 days ago. He didn't come home, didn't call, nothing. At first, I thought he was just staying with one of his business partners." She scoffed, bitterness dripping from her words. "But then I got a call, a man's voice, telling me to keep my mouth shut and to forget about Richard. That he's gone for good." I raised an eyebrow. "And you believed him?" "I didn't want to," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But then someone broke into my house last night. They didn't take anything, just trashed the place. Left me a message on my bathroom mirror. 'You're next.'" I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just a marital spat or a desperate cry for attention. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and Alice was caught in the middle. "Why come to me?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. "You've got plenty of connections, don't you? Surely one of Richard's powerful friends could help." Alice looked down at her coffee, her hands tightening around the cup. "Because I don't trust them. I don't know who's involved or how deep this goes. And because—" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I trust you, Jacob. You're the only person I have left." Her words hit me harder than I expected, stirring something I thought I'd buried long ago. Trust? After what she did. I wanted to laugh, to tell her she'd lost the right to use that word with me. But there was something in her eyes, fear, desperation, and maybe even regret, that made me stay. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "I'll look into it. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't like mysteries. And this one's got my attention." Alice nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Jacob. Save it." I cut her off, rising from the booth. "I'll need access to Richard's records, bank accounts, business dealings, anything that might give me a lead. Can you get me that?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, I'll get you everything." "Good. And Alice." I leaned in closer, my voice low and deadly serious. "If you're lying to me about any of this, I'll walk away, and you'll be on your own. Got it?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand." Without another word, I turned and walked out into the cold night. The rain had eased, but the air still felt heavy, oppressive. I lit a cigarette and took a long drag, my mind racing. Alice's story was messy, full of holes and unanswered questions. But if what she said was true, then this wasn't just about a missing husband. It was about something far bigger, far darker. And I was already in too deep to walk away. As the smoke curled into the night sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just stepped into the middle of something I couldn't control. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The next morning, I sat in my car outside Richard's sleek, glass-walled office building, sipping coffee that was as bitter as my mood. I didn't trust Alice, not fully. But her fear wasn't an act, and if someone wanted her dead, it meant there was more to this than a jilted ex-lover seeking revenge. Inside the building, the receptionist gave me a forced smile as I flashed my private investigator's license. "I'm here about Richard Lawson," I said. "His wife's concerned. He's been missing for 3 days." Her smile faltered. "Mr. Lawson's unavailable." "Unavailable how?" I pressed. Her eyes darted toward a pair of security guards near the elevators. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't disclose." "Save it," I interrupted, turning toward the elevator. The guards watched me, but I moved with the confidence of someone who belonged. I had no intention of asking for permission to snoop around. On the top floor, Richard's office was locked. Standard. But I'd picked locks more complicated than this in my sleep. 5 minutes later, I was inside. The room reeked of wealth. Leather furniture, a mahogany desk, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. But it wasn't the decor that caught my attention. It was the mess. Papers were scattered across the desk, drawers half open, and a shattered glass lay near the corner. Someone had been here before me, and they hadn't been subtle about it. I rummaged through the papers, looking for anything that might hint at Richard's whereabouts. Contracts, financial statements, emails. None of it made sense until I found a name that sent a chill down my spine. Cortez Group. The Cortez Group was more than just a faceless corporation. They were infamous for laundering money, running offshore accounts, and making inconvenient people disappear. If Richard had gotten tangled up with them, then he was playing a game that no one wins. I snapped a few pictures of the documents with my phone, then searched the desk drawers for anything more personal. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old files, I found a keycard with the logo of a high-end storage facility downtown. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. Back in my car, I called Alice. She answered on the second ring, her voice shaky. "Did you find anything?" "Maybe," I said. Richard's office was trashed, but I found a keycard to a storage facility. "I'm heading there now." "Be careful, Jacob," she said, her voice laced with genuine worry. "I don't want you getting hurt because of me." "I've been hurt before," I replied, ending the call before she could respond. The storage facility was a fortress. Cameras on every corner, a gated entrance, and a bored-looking security guard sitting in a glass booth. I parked a block away and walked in, flashing the keycard as if I belonged. The card granted me access to unit number 237. Inside, I found a small, meticulously organized space. There were boxes labeled with dates, a laptop, and a safe bolted to the floor. I started with the boxes, each filled with files, photos, and receipts. It was a goldmine of evidence, proof of Richard's dirty dealings with the Cortez Group. There were bank statements showing millions transferred to offshore accounts, photos of Richard meeting with men who looked like they belonged on a most wanted list, and encrypted documents that would take hours to crack. But it was the laptop that revealed the most chilling discovery. I booted it up and found a folder labeled Blackmail. Inside were videos and photos of high-profile politicians, CEOs, and even law enforcement officials caught in compromising situations. Richard had been playing with fire, collecting leverage against people far more dangerous than him. One file, however, stood out. A grainy video of Alice. She was arguing with Richard, her voice raised, her face twisted with anger. "You don't know what you're getting into, Richard," she shouted. "They'll kill us both." The video ended abruptly, but it left me with more questions than answers. What had Alice known about Richard's dealings? And why hadn't she told me everything? Before I could dig deeper, I heard footsteps outside the unit. My heart raced as I quickly shut the laptop and grabbed a folder of documents. The footsteps stopped, and a shadow loomed under the door. "Hey!" A deep voice barked, followed by a pounding knock. "You're not supposed to be in there." I cursed under my breath, slipping the folder into my jacket. There was no time to play it cool. I opened the door and shoved past the security guard, sprinting toward the exit. "Stop!" he shouted. But I was already out the gate, blending into the city streets. As I caught my breath in a dark alley, clutching the stolen folder, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Alice or Richard. I'd stumbled onto something far more dangerous. And now, there was no turning back. The folder felt heavier with every step I took. I returned to my office, locking the door behind me, and dumped the contents onto my desk. Pages of wire transfers, emails, and surveillance photos sprawled across the surface like a web of deceit. But my eyes kept drifting back to the still frame from the video, the look of terror on Alice's face as she argued with Richard. What was she hiding? I poured myself a drink and stared out the window. The city stretched out below, its lights flickering like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Richard was either dead or running for his life, and Alice, she wasn't just a victim. She was involved, deeper than she'd let on. The phone buzzed on my desk, breaking my thoughts. It was Alice. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice strained. "Plenty," I said, lighting a cigarette. "But you've got some explaining to do first." "I told you everything I know," she said, her voice defensive. "No," I said sharply. "You told me what you wanted me to know. You didn't mention that you and Richard were arguing about the Cortez group. You knew what he was involved in, didn't you?" Silence. "Alice," I pressed. "If you don't start talking, I'm done. I'll walk away, and you can figure this out on your own." "I knew," she admitted finally, her voice a broken whisper. "I knew Richard was laundering money for the Cortez group. I begged him to stop, to get out before it was too late. But he wouldn't listen. He said he had everything under control." "And the blackmail?" I asked. "The videos, the photos? Did you know about those?" "I found out later," she said. "He was using them to protect himself, to keep the Cortez group from turning on him. But it wasn't enough, Jacob. They found out. They always do. And now they're coming after you," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "Why didn't you go to the police?" She laughed bitterly. "The police? Half of them are on the Cortez group's payroll. They'd bury this faster than you can blink." She was right. In a city like this, justice was just another commodity bought and sold by the highest bidder. "So what's your plan?" I asked. "You think I'm going to take on the Cortez group alone?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I can't do this without you." Her words hung in the air, a plea wrapped in regret. Despite my anger, despite the scars she'd left on me, I couldn't deny the pull, the part of me that still wanted to protect her, even if it meant putting my own life on the line. "I'll help you," I said finally. "But if we're going to do this, I need everything, every detail, every secret. No more lies, Alice. No more lies," she promised. The next morning, we met in a rundown motel on the edge of town. Alice looked worse than before, her face pale and her hands trembling as she handed me another folder. "These are all the accounts Richard used," she said. "Offshore banks, shell companies, everything he was using to hide the money." I flipped through the papers, my mind racing. "We'll need to follow the money," I said. "If we can prove where it's going, we might be able to figure out who's pulling the strings." Alice nodded, her eyes hollow. "What happens if we find them?" I looked at her, my jaw set. "We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But first, we need leverage, something strong enough to make them back off." She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "And if we don't find it? Then we'll have to disappear," I said. "Both of us." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in the motel room, piecing together the puzzle. The accounts led to a maze of transactions, but one name kept appearing. Victor Cortez. Victor was more than just a member of the Cortez group. He was their enforcer, the one who made problems disappear. If he was involved, then Alice's fears were justified. I looked at her, sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. She was broken, but she was still fighting. And so was I. The game was in motion, and there was no turning back. The only question now was who would make the first move, and who would survive to see the end. Victor Cortez was a name that carried weight, whispered in dark alleys and smoke-filled bars. He wasn't just a man. He was a shadow, a force that moved unseen until it was too late. If Richard had crossed Victor, then it wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and revenge. Alice and I sat in silence as I traced the web of transactions back to Victor. His fingerprints were everywhere, hidden beneath layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It was clear now. Richard wasn't just a pawn. He'd been trying to outmaneuver the king. "We need to find Victor," I said, breaking the silence. "If he's behind this, he's the key to everything." Alice paled. "Find him? Jacob. He'll kill us before we even get close." I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "We don't have a choice. If we don't find him first, he'll find you. And when he does, there won't be a second chance." She nodded reluctantly, her fear evident. "How do we even start?" I thought for a moment, then remembered a contact, Raymond Hayes, a former fixer who now ran an underground bar where people like Victor often did their business. If anyone could point us in the right direction, it was Raymond. That night, we found ourselves in a dimly lit bar on the south side of the city. The place reeked of stale beer and broken dreams. At the far end, a man with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes sat nursing a glass of whiskey. "Raymond." I approached him cautiously, signaling for Alice to stay back. "Raymond," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing. "Jacob Harris. Haven't seen you in years. Thought you were smart enough to stay out of trouble." "Trouble's my middle name," I said dryly. "I need information." Raymond smirked, but his expression quickly turned serious. "Information comes with a price." I slid a wad of cash across the table. "Tell me what you know about Victor Cortez." At the mention of Victor's name, Raymond's face darkened. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't mess with Victor unless you've got a death wish. Word is, he's been cleaning house. Richard Lawson got greedy, tried to play both sides. Victor doesn't take kindly to betrayal." "Where can I find him?" I asked. Raymond shook his head. "You don't find Victor. He finds you. But there's a club downtown, the Obsidian. It's where his men like to hang out. If you're lucky, you might catch a glimpse of him there." I nodded, slipping Raymond another bill. "Thanks, Ray." He grabbed my arm before I could leave. "Jacob, listen to me. Whatever you're planning, drop it. Victor's not just a man, he's a monster. People who cross him don't just disappear. They're erased, like they never existed." "I'll take my chances," I said, pulling away. The Obsidian was a high-end club that catered to the city's elite and its underworld. Flashing lights, pounding music, and a crowd of people desperate to lose themselves in the chaos. Alice and I slipped inside, blending with the shadows. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything or anyone that might lead us to Victor. "There," Alice whispered, nodding toward a VIP section guarded by two men who looked like they could break a man in half without breaking a sweat. We moved closer, careful not to draw attention. From our vantage point, I spotted a man seated at the center of the table. A tall, imposing figure with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. Victor Cortez. "Stay here," I told Alice, but she grabbed my arm. "Jacob, don't," she pleaded. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I'll be fine," I said, though my pulse was racing. "Just stay out of sight." I approached the VIP section, my heart pounding like a war drum. The guards stepped forward, blocking my path. "Private party," one of them growled. "I'm here to see Victor," I said calmly. "Tell him it's about Richard Lawson." The mention of Richard's name caused a flicker of recognition in the guard's eyes. He exchanged a glance with his partner, then stepped aside. Victor looked up as I approached, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Jacob Harris," he said, his voice smooth and menacing. "I've heard about you." The ex-husband turned private investigator. "What brings you to my table?" "I'm looking for answers," I said, meeting his gaze. "And I think you have them." Victor chuckled, a low, chilling sound. "Careful, Mr. Harris. Asking the wrong questions can be hazardous to your health." "I'll take my chances," I said, my voice steady. "What happened to Richard? And why are you coming after Alice?" His smirk faded, replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. "Richard made a mistake. He thought he could outsmart me, steal from me. No one steals from me, Jacob." "And Alice?" I pressed. Victor leaned back, his eyes glinting with amusement. Let's just say she knows more than she's letting on. You'd do well to ask her yourself. Before I could respond, he nodded to his guards. Show Mr. Harris the door. They grabbed me, dragging me through the club and throwing me out onto the rain-soaked street. As I picked myself up, blood trickling from my lip, I realized one thing. Victor wasn't just dangerous. He was untouchable. But if Alice really did know something, then the answers weren't with Victor, they were with her. The rain was relentless as I drove back to the motel. Each drop on the windshield felt like a countdown, ticking closer to whatever endgame this nightmare held. My mind raced with Victor's parting words. Ask her yourself. What else was Alice hiding? When I stepped into the room, she was sitting on the bed, her knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the television's static glow. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with worry when she noticed the cut on my lip. What happened? She asked, standing quickly. Victor, I said, wiping the blood with the back of my hand. He gave me nothing except more questions. Her face paled at the mention of his name, and I saw her hands start to shake. You shouldn't have gone, she whispered. Maybe not, I said, throwing my coat onto a chair. But I got something out of it. He told me to ask you. So, Alice, I'm asking, what aren't you telling me? She flinched as if I'd struck her, her eyes darting away. I told you everything, she said weakly. No, I snapped, my voice rising. You told me what you thought I needed to hear. But Victor thinks you know something important. So what is it? What are you so afraid of? Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she'd shut down completely. But then she spoke, her voice trembling. There's a reason Richard kept those blackmail files, she said. It wasn't just to protect himself. It was leverage for both of us. Both of you, I echoed, my stomach tightening. She nodded, wiping her tears. Richard wasn't the only one who had dealings with the Cortez group. I helped him. I managed some of the accounts, moved the money when things got too risky. I didn't want to, Jacob, but he said they'd kill us both if I didn't. The room felt like it was closing in around me. You were laundering money for them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice breaking. But it gets worse. A few months ago, Richard started keeping a second set of books, tracking every dirty deal, every bribe. He wanted to take over, to replace Victor. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. And now he's gone, I muttered, the pieces starting to fall into place. Victor found out, didn't he? Alice nodded, her face a mask of grief and fear. They didn't just want Richard, Jacob. They want those files. They think I have them. I sank into the chair, running a hand through my hair. Do you? She hesitated, then pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. This is all I have. It's encrypted, but Richard said it would take them down if it ever got out. I stared at the drive, feeling the weight of it even before I touched it. This wasn't just evidence, it was a death sentence. For both of us. You should have told me this from the start, I said, my voice cold. I was scared, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't know who to trust. I stood, pacing the room. We can't go to the police. Victor owns half the force. And we can't keep running. They'll find us eventually. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. We find someone who can crack this encryption, I said, holding up the drive. If this really has the power to take down the Cortez group, then we need to make sure it gets into the right hands. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and dead ends. Every hacker, tech guru, or shady contact I knew either refused to help or didn't have the skills. But finally, I found someone. A man named Declan, a reclusive genius who worked out of a dingy basement in the warehouse district. Declan wasn't cheap, and he wasn't friendly. You've got 20 minutes, he said as we handed him the drive. If this thing's as locked up as you say, it won't be easy. He worked in silence, his fingers flying over the keyboard, the screen filled with lines of code. Alice sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, Declan leaned back, his face grim. You weren't kidding. This is some serious stuff. He clicked a few keys, and a series of files opened on the screen: financial records, emails, and video recordings. This is everything, he said, his voice tinged with awe. Bank accounts, offshore transfers, names of politicians, judges, cops, all of them in Victor's pocket. If this got out, it'd be a bloodbath. I felt a cold sense of vindication. Can you copy it? Already did, he said, handing me a second drive. But listen, man, once this gets out, you're a dead man walking. They'll come after you, her, anyone connected to this. I know, I said, slipping the drive into my pocket. But it's our only shot. Declan shook his head, muttering under his breath as he went back to his computer. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. Alice looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and something else. Hope. We're not out of this yet, I said, starting the car. But we just might have a fighting chance. As we drove into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Somewhere out there, Victor was waiting, and the next move was his. The cold, metallic weight of the USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than it should. Every streetlight we passed cast long, distorted shadows over the wet pavement, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Alice sat in the passenger seat, her eyes darting between the side mirrors and the road ahead. Her grip on the armrest was tight, her knuckles white. You think they know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They always know, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel. The question is, how long before they act? We had the evidence to take down the Cortez group, but evidence meant nothing if we couldn't stay alive long enough to use it. I thought about the names in those files, politicians, cops, even judges. They weren't just corrupt. They were complicit. I have a safe house, I said, breaking the silence. It's not much, but it'll buy us some time. Alice nodded, her face pale. Do you think they'll find us? They'll try, I said, my voice grim. But we'll be ready. The safe house was a rundown cabin in the woods, miles from the city and far off the grid. It wasn't exactly homey, but it had the essentials. A generator, a few days' worth of food, and a stash of weapons I'd hoped I'd never have to use. As I locked the door behind us, I noticed Alice shivering. I handed her a blanket and lit a fire in the small, rusted stove. We'll rest here for the night, I said. In the morning, we'll figure out our next move. She nodded, but her eyes were distant, haunted. Do you ever think about what could have been, Jacob? She asked suddenly. If none of this had happened? I hesitated, then sat across from her. Every damn day, I admitted. But the past doesn't matter now. All that matters is surviving this. She looked away, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't respond. There were too many scars, too much pain between us. Apologies wouldn't change what she'd done. But they didn't change what I had to do either. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of crunching gravel outside. My hand instinctively reached for the gun under my pillow. Alice was still asleep on the couch, her face illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. I moved silently to the window, peeking through a gap in the curtains. The woods were dark, but there was movement, a shadow flitting between the trees. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, looking for anything out of place. Then I saw it. The faint glow of a cigarette, a flicker of light in the darkness. Someone was out there, watching. I crept back to Alice, shaking her gently. Alice, wake up, I whispered. Her eyes snapped open, and I put a finger to my lips, motioning for her to stay quiet. She nodded, her fear evident. We're not alone, I said softly. Stay here. If anything happens, you run. She grabbed my arm. Jacob, don't. I'll be fine, I said, cutting her off. Just stay hidden. Gun in hand, I slipped out the back door, the cold night air biting at my skin. The woods were eerily silent. Every crunch of leaves beneath my boots amplified. Who's out there? I called, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. No answer. I moved cautiously, circling around to where I'd seen the cigarette glow. The ground was soft, damp from the earlier rain, and I noticed fresh footprints in the mud. "Come out!" I shouted. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in black, his face obscured by a hood. He didn't say a word, but the glint of the knife in his hand spoke volumes. "You don't want to do this," I warned, raising my gun. The man lunged, his movements quick and deliberate. I fired, the sound echoing through the trees, but he was fast, dodging to the side. His knife slashed through the air, narrowly missing me as I stumbled back. We fought in the darkness, the clash of metal and the sound of labored breaths filling the air. He was strong, but I was fueled by desperation, by the need to protect Alice and end this nightmare. Finally, I got the upper hand, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. I pressed the barrel of my gun to his temple, my finger hovering over the trigger. "Who sent you?" I demanded. He laughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You already know," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Victor sends his regards." Before I could react, he bit down hard on something, a cyanide capsule. His body convulsed for a moment, then went still. I cursed, shoving his lifeless body aside. Victor's message was clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I returned to the cabin, Alice was waiting, her eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" she asked. "Victor knows where we are," I said, locking the door behind me. "We need to move now." As we packed our things and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Victor wouldn't stop until he had the drive, and us dead and buried. But if he wanted a war, he'd just found one. We had no choice but to leave the cabin. The night was suffocating, the woods too quiet, and I knew Victor's men wouldn't waste time hunting us down. The man I just killed. His final words echoed in my mind. "Victor sends his regards." This wasn't just about the files anymore. This was personal. We left everything behind. The fire, the weapons, even the little bit of food we had left. Alice's face was pale, her movements stiff as she followed me through the woods, our breaths visible in the cold air. Every step felt like we were walking toward an inevitable confrontation. "We can't keep running forever," Alice said quietly, her voice strained. "I know," I replied, my voice low. "We need to get to someone who can help us take down Victor." "Who?" Her eyes met mine, desperation seeping into her words. "Who do we trust anymore, Jacob?" The truth was, I didn't know. In this world of lies and betrayals, trust was a currency more valuable than gold. And right now, I was bankrupt. But I had to find someone who could help us take down the Cortez group before we became its next casualties. We reached the city by dawn, tired, cold, and running on fumes. I took Alice to a safe place, a dilapidated warehouse I knew of. No windows, only one locked door. It wasn't much, but it would keep us hidden for a little while. "Stay here," I told Alice, my voice clipped. "I need to make a few calls." She nodded, her lips tight, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Regret? Or maybe she was just trying to process it all, like me. The weight of everything was too much to carry alone. I walked out, pulling the collar of my jacket up against the wind. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a second, I hoped it was good news. But when I looked, I saw the name flash across the screen. Raymond. "Raymond," I said into the phone, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's the word?" "There's been a development." Raymond's voice came through, heavy with tension. "Victor's men are hitting every safe house in the area, looking for you. I don't know how much longer you can hide." "Damn it," I muttered. "I thought I had more time." "You don't," Raymond said bluntly. "But I might know someone who can help. You'll need to trust me on this one, Jacob. There's a man. A fixer, bigger than anything you've ever seen. His name's Carter Blackwell. You want to take down Cortez, you go through him." "Where do I find him?" "Meet me at 7th and Willow," Raymond instructed. "Don't bring Alice. And don't bring anything you don't need. He's not someone you trust lightly, but he's the only shot you've got. I hung up and turned back to the warehouse, my mind racing. I didn't know Carter Blackwell, but I didn't have a choice. If Raymond thought he was the key to bringing down Victor, then I had to take the risk. I left Alice behind, not wanting to drag her into another dangerous situation. The streets felt different now, hostile, filled with shadows I couldn't escape. As I neared 7th and Willow, I spotted Raymond leaning against a black SUV, looking around like a man who knew he was being watched. "Glad you could make it," Raymond said as I approached. "What's the deal with this Blackwell guy?" I asked, my voice low. "He's not a good guy," Raymond replied. "But sometimes that's exactly what you need. He's got connections everywhere, law enforcement, the underground, the political sphere. If anyone can help you take down Cortez, it's him. But it'll cost you. And I'm not talking money." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew the answer. In this world, favors came with prices, and that price was often your soul. We climbed into the SUV, and Raymond drove us into the heart of the city. Blackwell's headquarters were a tall, glass-covered building that stood out even among the towering skyscrapers. "You'll be meeting him in person, but don't get comfortable," Raymond warned. "Carter Blackwell doesn't like visitors. Not unless you've got something he needs." I wasn't sure what I had to offer him, but I'd find out soon enough. Blackwell's office was nothing like I expected. It wasn't some luxurious penthouse or sleek, corporate setup. It was a small, unmarked door in the back of a high-end restaurant. Raymond knocked twice, and the door opened, revealing a tall, imposing man with a sharp suit and colder eyes. "Carter Blackwell. You're Jacob Harris," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge. "I've heard a lot about you." "And you are?" I asked, my voice steady but alert. "I'm someone you're going to want on your side if you plan on surviving Victor Cortez," he said. "I know why you're here, and I'm prepared to offer you something that might help. But first, you need to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. Victor's too big, too connected." "I don't need easy," I replied. "I need a way to end this." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but know this. The moment you step into this, there's no turning back." "I'm already past that point," I said, my voice hard. "Good," he said, pulling out a thick folder from his desk. "Let's get to work." Raymond's warning hung heavy in the air. Carter Blackwell was a man of few words, but the way he spoke, the cold confidence in his every movement, told me that he had more than enough power to bring down a man like Victor. But I also knew one thing. The closer I got to Blackwell, the more I was entering the abyss. There would be no going back. Would Alice and I survive this? Or would we be swallowed whole by the very monster we were trying to destroy? As the door closed behind me, I realized one thing. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a war for control, and only one side would walk away unscathed. The moment the door shut behind us, I felt the shift. The air in Carter Blackwell's office was thick with an unspoken promise. A deal made, but not yet sealed. His cold, calculating gaze bore into me as he tossed the folder across the desk, the papers inside spilling out like confetti. "I assume you know what's at stake, Jacob," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Victor Cortez doesn't just run a criminal empire. He's embedded in every level of this city. Every law enforcement agency, every politician, every businessman. Victor owns them and they all owe him something." I nodded, my fists clenched. "I'm aware. You're not just fighting him," Blackwell continued. "You're fighting a system that protects him. And if you want to take him down, you'll need more than just evidence. You'll need power. You'll need influence. And most importantly, you'll need to be willing to pay a price." I narrowed my eyes, leaning forward. "What price?" He smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the smile of a man who knew more about me than I wanted him to. "You'll find that out soon enough. But for now, you'll need to trust me, Jacob. And you'll need to do things you might not be proud of. Trust. I trusted people before, and every time it had come back to bite me. But I didn't have a choice. Victor was relentless, and time was running out." "All right," I said, my voice hard. "What's the plan?" Blackwell pushed the folder toward me, the contents now neatly arranged. This is a list of Victor's top lieutenants, his inner circle. I've already made arrangements for you to meet with some of them. Each of them controls a piece of the city's power, but they're not as loyal to Cortez as he thinks. They'll listen to you, if you can convince them. Convince them? I repeated. How? Blackwell's grin widened. By offering them something they want. In this city, everyone has a price. You just have to figure out what it is. I glanced at the folder, my mind racing. This wasn't a simple takedown. It was a game of manipulation. A game I wasn't sure I was ready to play. But there was no turning back now. You'll meet with one of them first, Blackwell said, standing up and opening a drawer in his desk. His name is Marcus Bellamy. He controls the docks, smuggling, weapons, everything. He's in deep with Cortez, but he's also ambitious. And ambition makes people vulnerable. I took the folder and stood up, the weight of it pressing down on me. Where do I find him? He'll find you, Blackwell replied cryptically. Just be ready when he does. And remember, he won't be your friend. You need to make him think you're offering him something bigger than Cortez. That's the only way he'll listen. As I left Blackwell's office, my thoughts swirled with uncertainty. I wasn't sure what kind of man Marcus Bellamy was, but I knew one thing. He wouldn't be easy to manipulate. If Blackwell's plan was going to work, I had to play my part perfectly. The meeting with Marcus Bellamy took place in a rundown bar on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, to get lost in the noise and the alcohol. But in this case, it was the perfect place for a meeting with someone like Bellamy. When I walked in, the bar was empty except for a few patrons scattered around the back tables. At the far end, a man sat alone, nursing a drink. His sharp suit and expensive watch made him stand out in a place like this. Marcus Bellamy. He looked up as I approached, his cold eyes assessing me in an instant. You're Jacob Harris, he said, his voice low and gravelly. That's me, I replied, taking a seat across from him. I've heard a lot about you, he said, his gaze never leaving mine. You're playing a dangerous game, Harris. You know that, right? I'm aware, I said, my voice steady. But I'm willing to play if it means taking down Victor Cortez. Bellamy chuckled. A low, dark sound. You think you can take down Cortez? He owns this city. He's untouchable. That's where you're wrong, I said, leaning forward. Cortez may own this city, but he doesn't own you. And you're smart enough to know that. You want more power, Marcus. You want more than just the docks. I can give you that. His eyes flickered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. And what makes you think you can offer me anything I want? I smiled. Because you're not happy with what you have. You've outgrown Cortez, but you're stuck in his shadow. If you want to step out, if you want to take his place, I can help you do that. For a moment he was silent, considering my words. Then he leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. And what's the catch? What do you want in return? Victor Cortez's empire is crumbling, and you can either help me bring it down, or you can sit back and watch someone else take over. I'm offering you the chance to rise to the top, Marcus. But you'll have to make a choice. Loyalty to Cortez, or loyalty to power. Bellamy's eyes narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was calculating, weighing the options. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower now. All right, Harris. I'll hear you out. But remember this, you're asking me to turn my back on Cortez. And that's not something anyone does lightly. I'm not asking for loyalty, I said. I'm asking for ambition. And I know you have plenty of that. He stood up, extending his hand across the table. You've got yourself a deal. But remember, if you screw me over, I'll make sure your life isn't worth living. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of the deal settle in. This wasn't just about taking down Cortez anymore, it was about controlling the city, and Marcus Bellamy was the key. As I left the bar, the adrenaline began to wear off, and the reality of what I'd just done hit me. I crossed a line, one I wasn't sure I could come back from. But there was no turning back now. The game was on, and I was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. I returned to the warehouse, my mind racing. Bellamy was in. But this was just the beginning. The deeper I got into this mess, the more I realized that power came with a price, and I was beginning to wonder just how much I was willing to pay. Alice was waiting for me when I walked in, her face pale with worry. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaky. "We've got Bellamy on our side," I said, my voice distant. "But it's just the beginning." Her eyes widened, and I could see the fear in them. "What do you mean? What else is there?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. The price of power was far higher than I'd ever imagined, and I wasn't sure I could afford it anymore. The weight of everything was unbearable. The path I had chosen was now set, and there was no turning back. In just a few short days, I had gone from a man trying to survive to a man trying to take down one of the most dangerous criminals in the city. But now, as I stood in the heart of the storm, I realized something more than just my survival was at stake. It was about the city itself. It was about everything I had ever known. Marcus Bellamy was in. I had secured an ally, but at what cost? He was a snake in the grass, a man driven by ambition, someone who would slit your throat as soon as shake your hand. But right now, he was a necessary evil. He had connections, power, and resources. With him on our side, we could bring down Victor Cortez, but there was no telling what it would cost us once it was all over. The next move was critical. We had the inside track now, but it wasn't enough. Cortez's empire was like a massive web, each thread interwoven with influence and power, and the higher you climbed, the harder it was to escape. I met with Bellamy again, this time in a sleek, modern office building that reflected the world he was trying to create. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across his face. He looked more the part of a king than a man who once controlled smuggling rings at the docks. "You're here," he said, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. "I've got people in place. When we strike, it's going to be quick, swift. But you need to be ready for the fallout." "I've been ready for this," I replied, my voice steady despite the growing tension in my chest. "I've had to be. But Bellamy, what's the real plan here? What's your angle?" He didn't hesitate. "My angle is simple. Take down Cortez and seize everything he's built. Power, wealth, influence. We don't just destroy his empire. We inherit it." I frowned, unsure if I could stomach his ambition. "And what about Alice? What about the people caught in the crossfire?" His eyes gleamed coldly. "Those who get in the way get left behind. That's the price of power, Jacob. Don't forget that." The coldness in his voice was unsettling. But I had come too far to back out now. Bellamy's plan was our only chance, even if it meant becoming something I despised. Alice, ever the voice of reason, pulled me aside after my meeting with Bellamy. She had been quiet, observing everything from the shadows, but her eyes were now filled with a quiet concern. "Jacob," she said softly, "I can see the change in you, the way you're talking to him. You're not the same person anymore." I couldn't look her in the eye. "You don't get it, Alice. This isn't about who I was. It's about what I need to do." She grabbed my arm, forcing me to face her. "I know what you're trying to do. I know you want to destroy Victor. But don't lose yourself in the process. If you do, then what was the point of it all?" Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. I wanted to believe that everything I had done had been for her, for us. But now I wasn't so sure. The more I dove into this world of corruption and power, the more I realized that it didn't just change the people around me. It changed me, too. "I'm not going to lose myself," I said, though my voice trembled slightly. "I promise." But I wasn't sure if I believed that anymore. The closer I got to Cortez, the more I realized I was stepping into a game where survival meant becoming the very thing I swore I would never be. The night before the strike, Bellamy called. "It's time," he said. "We've set everything in motion. Tomorrow we take Cortez down. Tomorrow." The final step. Alice was asleep on the couch when I came back to the warehouse, the weight of the coming battle pressing down on me. I sat beside her, watching her breathe, her face soft and peaceful in the quiet of the room. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, waking just enough to feel my presence. "I have to be," I replied, my voice strained. Tomorrow we end this. End what? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Victor? Or yourself? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The operation was set in motion with ruthless efficiency. Marcus Bellamy had leveraged his power, manipulating everything and everyone in his path. Police officers, politicians, even a few former allies of Cortez, he had made deals with them all. They were to turn a blind eye as we moved in. The plan was simple. Hit Victor's compound at the heart of the city, eliminate his most loyal lieutenants, and make sure he couldn't escape. Bellamy's men would secure the perimeter while Alice and I would take care of the inside. The night of the operation, everything went dark. The city that had been my battleground for so long was now a cold, lifeless place. Every corner we turned, every step we took, felt like a final one. The compound was heavily guarded, but not enough to stop us. We breached the gates without much resistance, taking out a few of Cortez's men as we moved through the shadows. But the closer we got to Victor's office, the thicker the tension grew. We reached the door. Bellamy's men had secured the perimeter, and now it was up to us to finish this. I took a deep breath, adjusting my grip on the gun. I'll go first, Alice said, her voice steady. Stay behind me. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. As she pushed open the door, the room was eerily silent. And then there he was, Victor Cortez. He didn't flinch as we entered, his eyes cold as stone. I've been expecting you, he said, standing from behind his desk. You think you can take me down? You think you can destroy everything I've built? I leveled the gun at him, my finger itching on the trigger. But something stopped me. The reality of what I was about to do hit me like a wave. I wasn't just ending Victor Cortez's life, I was ending everything that came with it. The deals, the lies, the blood. You've already lost, Victor continued, his voice a low chuckle. You and your little empire are nothing. You'll be swallowed by the system. I don't think so, I said, the words barely leaving my mouth before I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the room. Cortez fell to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at me. It was over. As we walked away from the compound, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was emptiness. The weight of everything I had done, everything I had become, pressed down on me. Is it really over? Alice asked quietly, walking beside me. I didn't answer her right away. There was nothing left to say. Cortez was dead, but the scars of this war would remain forever. The city would continue to turn, and I would continue to live in the shadows of what I had become. But the one thing I knew for sure was this: I had finally taken control. And in this world, that was all that mattered. The game had ended. But in a world where power is always shifting, the question remained: was the price of winning worth it? Was I willing to pay the cost of my own soul for the control I had fought so hard to claim? For those watching from the outside, it was a victory. For me, it was just another day in the abyss. What would you do in my shoes? Would you sacrifice everything for power? Or would you hold on to the fragments of your humanity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew.